Ever heard someone quote half a Bible verse out of context? Ever read some crazy Bible claim on social media followed by a proof text without exegesis? Here on Proof Text Flops, we call out this nonsense for what it is. My name is Hudson Smelly, and I'm going to give you my elevator speech version of why that verse doesn't mean what so many people think it means. Today we're looking at James 2:14, unquestionably one of the most debated New Testament verses. It reads, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Can such faith save him?" The answer is of course not. And the proof texters run with that, and they argue that if you claim to believe the gospel but don't have sufficient good works to show for it, you're not saved. But here's what that verse really means and why. Now, as always, context is key, and in my experience with this particular proof text, a discussion of the context is usually absent. After the prologue, in chapter 1, verses 1 to 18, James states in chapter 1, verse 19, "My dear brothers and sisters, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger." This central verse in the book provides the three-part division of the main body of the epistle. It's the first division, being quick to listen, that we will focus on here. In James 1:21, James kicks off the first division with this exhortation that we should humbly receive the implanted word which is able to save your souls. Be quick to listen begins with humbly receiving God's word, like a seed that will be productive in our lives. The phrase James adds, which is able to save your souls, is also key to this division, and we're going to come back to what that means. The first division, as a cohesive unit of thought, continues all the way through the end of chapter 2, and you should read the whole thing carefully. Critical for our purposes is that we note the focus in the balance of chapter 1 and the first half of chapter 2. It's on being a doer of God's word and not a hearer only. A hearer knows God's word. The hearer will agree it's true, but James wants to see it in action. He especially focuses on what he calls the royal law, or the law of liberty, that we love our neighbor as ourselves, chapter 2 and verse 8. We see that focus in the examples he presents of caring for widows and orphans, chapter 1, verse 27, not showing favoritism within the church setting, chapter 2, verse 1 to 7, and providing for a brother or sister in need, chapter 2, verse 15 to 16. So with this in mind, let's go back and read 2:14 again. "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works?" The answer is it's no good. Can such faith save him? Of course not. But good exegesis can't stop there. It begins with context, and it asks important questions. We need to ask first, to whom is James asking these rhetorical questions? Second, what judgment is at issue? In other words, what is the saving he's talking about? And third, what's the content or the faith that's under consideration when James asks the question, can such faith save him? We begin with who is being asked the questions. That's easy to answer because James repeatedly refers to his readers as his brothers and sisters. He means his fellow Christians. He presupposes they're believers, not people in need of hearing the gospel. And he refers to them as brothers and sisters in chapter 2, verse 14. Second, what's the judgment at issue? This is where the real debate is. This is also answered from context, but we can't simply assume what the judgment is. The prior two verses, chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, give the immediate context we need. "Speak and act as those who are to be judged by the law of freedom, for judgment is without mercy to the one who has not shown mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment." Clearly, this is the judgment at issue in chapter 2, verse 14. Now let's step back and think about the big picture in the Bible. Believers will not go through the great white throne judgment of Revelation 20. Go read the passage. But the New Testament speaks repeatedly of Christians giving an account before Jesus Christ. This is often called a judgment. It's not with a view to our eternal destiny. Are you going to heaven or hell? But whether you will get rewards and inheritance based on faithfulness to living out God's word during this lifetime. Those passages that talk about this judgment include Matthew 16, verses 24 to 27, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 10 to 15, Romans 14, 10 to 12, and several other New Testament passages. What we're seeing in James 2, verses 12 to 13, is this judgment on believers on the basis of the law of freedom and on mercy. He explicitly says that. In other words, whether they were faithful doers of the royal law, that we love our neighbor as ourselves. That was the context from chapter 1 and the first half of chapter 2, culminating in the description of this judgment. The standard here is not whether their names are in the book of life, as it is in Revelation 20, verse 15. But there's more confirmation that what James has in mind is what we usually will refer to as the Bema judgment or the judgment seat of Christ. Recall James said in the opening verse, chapter 1, verse 21, of this division within the text, he started with that critical statement, humbly receive the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. James doesn't mention saving again after 121 until we get to 2:14. 2:14 is coming back. It's circling back to this matter of saving your souls. Now, when we use this word in English, we almost always mean the immaterial part of us, our spirit, if you will, that goes to heaven when we die. Then we write that English understanding back into our Greek New Testament, and that's an error. But spirit in Greek is a different word altogether. The word here, psyche, is usually translated either as soul or life, and while it has several possible nuances, it most commonly refers to our experience of life, what we think, speak, and do. And it's in that way that we even use it today when we say that someone lived their life well. When we say that, we're talking about what the Bible writers often refer to as a soul, what for clarity we might call a soul life. Jesus used the same phrasing in Matthew 16 about saving your life or saving your soul when he related living for him as a disciple to being rewarded by him at his return. The concept of saving a life or a soul is about how our life lived for Jesus today may translate into rewards in eternity later at his return. So when James asks rhetorically, can such faith save him? He's referencing the saving of the soul that he already introduced at the beginning of the unit in chapter 1, verse 21. He's asking the question if faith without works can be rewarded. And the answer, of course, is it won't. And this helps get to the third question. What is the content of the faith under consideration? People just assume without any effort to show from the context that it's the gospel message. It is not. In other words, we're asking what specific belief is it that standing alone will not withstand this judgment. It's not the gospel, because James readers are already brethren. Everything we see from 121 forward demands that it's believing God's word, and especially this royal law that we love our neighbors. That which James says, I want to see it in action. Believing we should love others is not enough, because this judgment in James chapter 2, verses 12 to 13, is about the faithfulness of our walk, not whether we're Christians at all. It's about the condition of our soul or our soul life, that which we say, think, and do. It's the action of loving others that will stand the judgment. The action of loving others that will save or deliver our lives, in the sense that what we do now gets translated into rewards in eternity. James 2:14 is not about people claiming to believe the gospel, but going to hell because they lack sufficient fruit. You are not saved by works. It is by grace through faith alone. It is not about spurious believers, but the possibility of genuine believers losing out on rewards because they knew they were supposed to love their neighbors as themselves. They knew what God's word says, but they were hearers only and not doers. The very next verse and the one after that, chapter 2, verse 15 and 16, further confirm this interpretation, because James goes to another example of loving a Christian brother or sister in need by actually moving in action to meet that need instead of offering empty words Be warned. Being a doer of the royal law is what he's talking about throughout the passage. You don't get to jump ship in 2:14 to embed your personal theology. My Christian friends, let's always do the hard work of exegeting passages in context with an eye on the structure of the book we're studying, the flow of the author's argument, and what the words that most of us are reading in translation actually mean. Let's not fall for proof text flops.